The Nova effect, the tragedy of good luck. What if the worst thing saved your life? Have you ever felt like life was falling apart, only to realize later it was actually falling into place? In this video, we take you on a quiet, powerful journey through grief, healing, and unexpected transformation. Based on a deeply human story, we explore the hidden intelligence of suffering and how chaos often carries secret meaning. If you're feeling lost, broken, or uncertain, stay. Not because we have answers, but because within these questions lies the path to your own awakening. Let your breath slow. Let your mind soften. This story may just mirror something within you that has longed to be seen. The origin of chaos, when loss strikes. Eric did not plan for chaos that morning. It was supposed to be a simple walk. He leashed up Nova, his dog, and stepped outside into the cool air of a quiet suburban street. The sky was clear. Everything was ordinary. That, perhaps, was what made the unraveling so sharp. As they passed a patch of bushes, a rabbit darted out like a living spark. In a flash, Nova lunged, and the leash slipped from Eric's fingers before he could tighten his grip. She was gone. For a moment, Eric stood frozen. His mind tried to catch up with his body, but it was already sprinting after her. Nova, wild with instinct, did not look back. The faster Eric ran, the faster she disappeared into the brush, chasing something that no longer mattered. What followed was a desperate, aimless search. Eric called her name until his voice cracked. He ran through backyards, down side streets, through parks and parking lots. Nothing. The day passed. Nova did not return. That night, silence in the house felt louder than any sound he had ever known. Her bed was untouched, her bowl still full. Eric stared at the leash on the floor as if it held answers. The days that followed blurred into a haze of posters, phone calls, and small false hopes. Neighbors said they would keep an eye out. Friends shared posts online. But Nova was nowhere. Eric began to wonder not just where she was, but whether she still existed. He questioned his memory, the mechanics of his own hands, the randomness of the rabbit. 1 second. One slip. Was this how everything unraveled? He did not cry the first night, or the second. But grief has a strange way of revealing itself, not always loud, not always obvious. Sometimes, it is in the waiting. Sometimes, in the quiet replay of everything you could have done differently. Sometimes, in the ache of not knowing. A chance encounter, a new door opens. A full week passed. Eric had begun to move through his days like a ghost. Functioning but distant. The absence of Nova had settled into every part of his routine like dust. He still walked the same streets where she vanished, hoping for a familiar bark. A shadow behind a tree, anything. Then one afternoon, a knock at the door. When Eric opened it, there stood a woman holding a leash. At the end of it was Nova. She was thinner and dirtier. But her eyes lit up the moment she saw him. In seconds, she leapt into his arms, her tail thrashing wildly. Eric dropped to the floor, holding her, overcome by something too large for words. The woman introduced herself as Vanessa. She had found Nova wandering near a wooded trail several miles away. No collar, no tags. Just a tired dog who followed her home. Eric could hardly believe it. He thanked her over and over, struggling to say more as Nova licked his face. Vanessa did not seem in a rush to leave. They talked. It began simply. Where she lived. What she did. They both laughed at Nova's stubbornness. Then more. Small details became threads. Curiosity led to warmth. There was no effort in it. It felt like something unfolding rather than being built. Over the next few days, they met again. First to walk Nova together. Then coffee. Then dinner. The connection grew fast but not reckless. It felt natural, like something long overdue. Eric started noticing her in quiet ways. The way she paused before speaking. The light in her face when she smiled. Her presence calmed him in ways he had not realized he needed. For the first time in a long time. Life felt not just survivable, but open. And through it all, Nova lay between them, a quiet bridge neither of them expected, a reminder that even in chaos, something kind can find its way through. An unexpected incident, a slap from randomness. 2 months had passed since Nova returned. In that time, Eric's life had shifted from emptiness to something resembling peace. His connection with Vanessa had deepened. Their days began to fold into each other with a quiet familiarity. Small rituals formed. A morning text. A shared meal. Nova sleeping curled between them on the couch. It all felt strangely secure. One evening, Vanessa asked Eric to pick her up from a bookstore downtown. It was a small request. He had done it many times before. Eric grabbed his keys, told Nova he would be right back, and headed out. The streets were busy with evening light casting gold across storefronts. He turned left at a light, then drove through an intersection he had crossed 100 times. That was the moment. The exact second. A car from the side street ran the red light at full speed. Eric had no time to react. The impact struck the side of his vehicle with brutal force. Glass shattered. Aired. Metal screamed. The world spun. He lost consciousness as the car twisted in a violent rotation. When Eric opened his eyes, the ceiling was white and unfamiliar. A steady beeping reached his ears. His body ached, and he could feel the stiffness of bandages. A doctor stood at the foot of the bed. Eric blinked. Disoriented. He asked what had happened. The doctor explained the crash. He explained the scans. He said they had found something unexpected in the brain imaging. Eric listened. Not fully absorbing the words. A tumor. A glioma. It had nothing to do with the crash. In fact, the crash might have saved him. If not for the scans, the tumor would have remained hidden. It had not yet turned malignant. They had caught it just in time. At first, Eric was unable to make sense of it. How could something so destructive reveal something life-saving? How could a near-death moment become a beginning? The randomness of it all clawed at his understanding. He had left the house on a normal errand. He had taken a familiar road. Now he was facing brain surgery. He thought of Vanessa waiting. Of Nova watching the door. Of the twist in the timeline no one could have predicted. Sometimes life strikes without warning. Sometimes the worst moment is also the one that gives you another chance. The other side of luck, awakening through adversity. The next morning, the doctor returned with calm eyes and steady words. He explained the results of the scan. The tumor was still small. It had not spread. It was operable. They would schedule surgery soon. There was risk. But also hope. Eric listened quietly. Then he asked to be left alone for a while. Lying in that sterile room with the scent of antiseptic thick in the air, Eric felt something strange. Not just fear. Not even grief. It was a weightless suspension. He stared at the ceiling and tried to trace the path that had led him here. A leash slipping. A stranger at the door. A bookstore. A red light. It all seemed disconnected, yet each moment was woven into the next like invisible thread. He thought of how he had blamed himself for Nova running away. How he had praised the universe for bringing Vanessa into his life. How quickly he had cursed fate after the crash. And now this. A tum. Or discovered because of a random act of chaos. He realized how fragile his judgment had been. How easily he labeled things as good or bad while knowing so little of what would come next. One moment had felt like the end. Another. Like salvation. But they were connected. The good was born from the bad. The bad held hidden blessings. He had been wrong so many times in trying to name what things meant. Eric sat up slowly. His body still sore. He took a breath and noticed the quiet inside himself. It was not peaceful. But present. He saw now that control was an illusion. That certainty was always temporary. That life would never fully explain itself. What mattered was how he chose to meet it. He thought of Nova sleeping at home. Of Vanessa's voice through the phone last night. Steady and scared. He thought of how one collision revealed something deeper than injury. It had uncovered the limits of his old beliefs. The tumor was not just a medical event. It was a mirror. It showed him how little he understood about cause and effect. About what truly protects us or harms us. It asked him to stop looking for guarantees and start listening for meaning. And in that moment, Eric felt something shift. Not clarity. Not comfort. But a strange kind of acceptance. A transformational journey, walking through darkness. The surgery date came quickly. Eric did not feel ready but realized that readiness was a myth. Some things do not wait for permission. He stigma. The forms. He answered questions. He smiled weakly at Vanessa, who tried to stay brave for both of them. Nova had to stay with a neighbor. The house felt incomplete without her. The night before the operation, Eric stood in the bathroom, staring at his reflection. His face looked the same. But he felt altered. Something had shifted. He was not the man he was weeks ago. He did not yet know who he was becoming. The morning was quiet. Nurses moved around him with calm efficiency. Vanessa held his hand until the last moment. She whispered that she would be there when he woke up. Eric closed his eyes and let the anesthesia take him. When he opened them again, it was done. His head throbbed and a thick bandage wrapped around it. The doctor explained that the tumor had been successfully removed. There were no signs of spreading. Eric nodded but said little. It would take time to understand what this truly meant. In the days that followed, recovery was slow. Each movement required patience. Each thought came with weight. But with every step, Eric felt something unfamiliar. It was not confidence. It was resolve. He had walked through something terrifying and returned. Not untouched, but intact. At night, he lay in bed and listened to the quiet. No alarms. No machines. Just the hum of his breath and the rhythm of being alive. He thought about how pain carves out space. How fear strips away the unnecessary. And how surviving can make room for something more than survival. The scar would remain. A line across his head. But it no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a mark of passage. A sign that something had ended. And something else had begun. Awakening, seeing yourself with a different pair of eyes. After returning home, Eric found himself moving slowly through familiar spaces that now felt unfamiliar. Everything was where it had always been. Yet something inside him had shifted. The silence of the house did not press against him the way it once had. It welcomed him instead. He noticed details he used to ignore. The soft scratches on the door frame where Nova used to wait. The way light moved through the kitchen in the afternoon. The breath between seconds. Vanessa visited every day. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they sat in silence. She brought food, laughter, and small reminders that healing was not linear. One day was steady. The next, uncertain. Eric began writing in a notebook. Not stories. Not plans. Just fragments. Feelings. Questions without answers. Who am I when I am not fixing or chasing anything? What remains when everything I depended on disappears? Is there a version of myself that exists beyond fear? He did not expect answers. But he started to understand that asking was the beginning. There was no switch to flip. No revelation that made everything clear. But in the quiet rhythm of reflection, he began to see how little he had known himself. He had lived much of his life reacting, trying to avoid pain or recreate comfort. But now he was learning to sit still with what was true. To look at the parts of himself he used to avoid. The anger. The sadness. The longing. Not as enemies to fix but as signals to listen to. Healing, he realized, was not about returning to who he was. It was about becoming someone new. Someone honest. Someone unafraid to admit he did not know. Someone willing to ask deeper questions even if they had no easy answers. There were still hard days. Still moments where fear crept in and doubt whispered. But now Eric met those moments with curiosity instead of panic. He had walked through pain and come out the other eyed. Not unchanged. But more awake than ever before. Mind and body, healing is more than surgery. Eric had always thought of healing as something physical. A broken bone. A wound that closed. A clear scan. But now he was learning that true recovery extended far beyond what doctors could see. It was not just about tissue. It was about trust. About rebuilding from the inside out. He started walking again. At first just down the block. His legs were steady but slow. His breath shorter than before. But the movement helped. The rhythm of steps. The cool air. The sense that he as still part of the world around him. Vanessa sometimes joined him. Other times he walked alone. These quiet moments became his classroom. He began to notice the connection between his thoughts and his posture. Between his breath and emotions. He learned how tension crept in. How his shoulders tightened when he felt vulnerable. How his jaw clenched when fear returned. The body was not separate from the mind. It was a mirror. He began gentle stretches in the mornings. Simple movements. A form of respect to his body for carrying him through what it had. He practiced slowing down. Chewing slower. Speaking slower. Listening. More. Not because someone told him to. But because speed now felt like avoidance. Stillness felt like truth. At night he read about trauma and the nervous system. About how the body holds memories long after the mind forgets. He saw himself in the pages. Saw how his reactions were not flaws but signals. Invitations to understand himself differently. He stopped expecting his old energy to return. He welcomed the new version of himself. A version that moved more deliberately. That chose his actions instead of reacting by default. That found peace. Not in control but in awareness. One morning he caught his reflection in the window. The scar was still there. But his eyes looked clearer. Not because the pain was gone. But because he was no longer running from it. Breaking the stigma, psychology is not weakness. Eric had never been someone who talked openly about emotions. He had always kept things inside, believing that strength meant silence. Growing up, vulnerability was something to hide. You endured. You managed. You moved on. Even in the worst moments of his life, he rarely let others see his struggle. He thought it made him resilient. But now everything had changed. He could no longer deny the truth of his experience. His mind had carried as many wounds as his body. And some had been there long before the accident. He began to realize how much of his pain had remained unspoken, how many parts of himself had been neglected out of fear of judgment or shame. Vanessa encouraged him to see a therapist. At first he resisted. Therapy seemed like a last resort, something people did when they could not handle life. But over time, he began to question that idea. Was it really weakness to seek help, or was it wisdom? He remembered nights when he lay awake with racing thoughts. The moments he froze in traffic for no clear reason. The unexpected anger that rose over small things. These were not flaws. They were signals. His mind was trying to speak in the only language it knew. When he finally made the appointment, he walked into the room with hesitation. But the therapist did not try to fix him. She listened. Asked gentle questions. Created a space where Eric could bring pieces of himself he had never said out loud. Week by week, he began to untangle the mess. Not to erase the past, but to understand it. He learned that being emotionally aware was not indulgent. It was courageous. That exploring his patterns did not make him broken. It made him whole. He stopped measuring his worth by how little he felt and started valuing his ability to feel deeply. He also began to speak more openly with friends. Not dramatic confessions, but honest moments. He shared parts of his story that used to scare him. To his surprise, people responded with warmth. Some admitted they had struggled too. Some thanked him for saying what they never could. The more he shared, the more he saw how deeply the stigma of mental health ran. So many people lived in silence, thinking they were alone. Thinking that asking for help made them weak. Eric knew now that strength did not mean avoidance. It meant presence. It meant facing your own mind with honesty and patience. It meant saying I am not okay and knowing that was a beginning. Not a failure. A new dawn, accept and move forward. The morning was cool and quiet. Eric stepped outside with Nova trotting beside him. The leash was firm in his hand this time. They moved slowly along the sidewalk. As the sun began to rise. The sky was streaked with soft colors and the air held that rare stillness that only exists at the very beginning of the day. It had been months since the accident. Since the surgery. Since the questions that cracked his sense of certainty. He had not returned to who he was before. He had stopped wanting to. That version of himself had been built to endure. This version was learning how to live. As they walked, Nova sniffed the base of trees and paused at familiar corners. Eric watched her with quiet gratitude. There had been a time he thought she was lost forever. There had been a time he believed his own Aoife was slipping away. Yet here they both were. Changed. Scarred. Still walking. He no longer searched for meaning in everything. Some things did not explain themselves. Some pain did not offer a lesson. But that did not make them meaningless. It made them real. And real was enough. He remembered the doctor saying the accident had saved his life. At the time it felt like a strange twist of fate. Now it felt like a message he could only hear because he had slowed down enough to listen. Life did not warn you. It arrived. It unraveled. It reassembled. It asked you to keep showing up. Eric no longer chased clarity. He practiced presence. Washing the dishes. Walking the dog. Talking to Vanessa in the evening light. These were not small things. They were anchors. Proof that he was here. That he had stayed. There were still shadows. Still doubts. But they no longer defined him. They moved around him like weather. Temporary. Passing. Sometimes heavy. Sometimes light. But never permanent. At the edge of the park, Nova stopped and looked up at him. Her eyes were steady. Waiting. Eric smiled and nodded. They turned down the path together. There was no grand conclusion. No moment of triumph. Only this. Breath in the lungs. Feet on the ground. The world unfolding one quiet step at a time. Each step was no longer about reaching somewhere, but about returning inward. Eric understood that life did not need to be fully understood. Only fully lived. He no longer waited for something grand to feel complete. As long as he could breathe, feel, and dare to face himself. Each new day was already a beginning. And in that quiet stillness, he found freedom.